Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert. And today's moment is from the Toccata in E minor, BWV 914. It's a multi-movement work, and the moment for today comes near the end in the Fugue. It's this simple four-note opening that launches the keyboard work Toccata in E minor, one of Bach's earlier keyboard works. And it has an apparent quality of freedom, as some toccatas or fantasias do, where it seems like it just flows from one thing to the next. But hidden in there is a very clear motivic principle. Those four notes, especially the first three of the step down and step back up, that ties the whole thing together. The work is in three parts, but the first part is divided. After the introduction, we get a marking a little bit faster, un poco allegro, where we hear a imitative two-part texture. This is actually a double fugue, because the next two voices to enter are those same two motifs, those same two subjects as the first. So what you hear at the beginning on the bottom is heard again lower on the bottom, and what you hear on the top is heard again higher on the top. Then when that's over, the official second part begins, Adagio, which is a lot more sort of firecrackery and expressive and almost angry. And then there is a closing fugue, which is sort of the real meat of it because it's the longest part in the score. And we're focusing today on the fugue. This is a listener suggestion from Santiago. Santiago is currently learning the Toccata in E minor and thinks that that fugue at the end would make a great episode of A Moment of Bach. We agree, Santiago. So the first thing about the whole thing as it gets into the fugue is that it's so unified. It's a unified whole. It doesn't have these big breaks between one part and another part as he does later in his life. And we think that that's because this was an earlier work. It was in very much the Buxtehude style, and the whole thing reads as sort of an extended fantasia that's so big that it can't just be in one part, but needs to be in a few different parts. But they really do kind of flow into each other. And they have a very active, almost violin type of fast texture, 16th note texture, such as the opening of this fugue. Performer of this toccata on the harpsichord, Bart Jacobs, points out that the fugue subject is very familiar. It's almost... Oh, yeah. It's almost. And in fact, there is another version of this fugue where it actually is that. And we think he changed it to this. This may have been someone else's fugue or fugue subject that Bach edited, because there's two different manuscripts. No originals, though, just copies. If the entire toccata structure is based on a very simple four-note motif that jumps down an octave, then this fugue subject can be taken to be an extension of that with a lot of things in between. You have the first part. And then that bottom note keeps on winding down and down. by half step until it reaches the octave span, which is the same span as the original 4 notes at the beginning of the toccata. I wonder if he found this fugue and then edited it and then wrote the beginning. But I don't think we know that information. Because it seems based on, they seem like they all go together really well.
Yeah.
I, for one, really prefer these earlier multi-movement work structures that flow and don't have such clear breaks between the movements. Because I think it really flows better and the unified whole is very strong. And it never feels like it was compiled by things that were written at different times, even if it might have been. It never feels that way. Also, speaking of musical intervals, there's a recurring dissonant seventh that occurs in this fugue subject. The first one, and the second one, and the third one. As the bottom note continues its strange path down by half step, the distance between the top and bottom note in this fugue subject is often a dissonant seventh. This harkens back to that double fugue adagio from the beginning movement, which is also based on sevenths. You have first a pure octave, and then when one note moves, you have the seventh, which must then be resolved.
You know, this idea of the movements feeling like a unified whole, I always find this interesting because it's not till later in music history where composers actually started using like motifs and really obvious themes in multiple movements of their works, you know? And then of course you get later to Wagner and in the famous leitmotif thing where he's just using, it's not like movements, it's like it's a full opera and he's using themes for the characters. But for something like this, I think you made a point earlier about the piece feeling like, most of Bach's pieces feel like they fit together, like he didn't just throw the movements together. From various sources, they feel like they work together. So I think that there's definitely, I mean, you're kind of proving it with what you're talking about, especially with the seventh interval motif thing. But I think that lends credence to the theory that Bach really did write these all to be together. In other words, that he wasn't just grabbing stuff from other sources. Or at least if he did, he was thinking carefully about which things he was grabbing, that they would be similar enough in their motives.
I agree. I think it's more subtle with Baroque composers, and sometimes Baroque multi-movement pieces sort of read as a collection of things that just sort of have instead the same feel or affect. Actually, that is what the composers intended.
But a lot of times they have all different affects in the different movements, but there's something else unifying them.
Yeah, and when it's like that, then it's much more subtle.
The Goethe's Sight is a great example of this. You mentioned in our very first, it was the 8th episode we ever did. It was in the first season. You mentioned how there's these unifying themes in that with the da-da-da-da-da-da thing that shows up in the first and last movements and in other spots. Mm-hmm. And it like ties the whole thing together, even when the affects are different between the different movements. So those things are very intentional. Actually, I shouldn't say that because maybe they're not intentional. It could just be that when you're writing a piece of music and it's 20 minutes long, your brain is in a certain space and Bach just uses those because those are on his mind, you know?
We do know that he wrote essentially from beginning to end, at least the cantatas. But I do think that there's some truth to it, Alex, that it's just the composer of this time does select the affect. So in Goethe's Zeit, that dun, da, da, dun, a sort of somber procession theme. And he, whether it was conscious or not, at least the feel of it, the affect of it was conscious and was intentional. And here, I think the unifying dexterity and the fact that it's in minor and it has this raised neighbor tone, this opening motif, and how it pervades all of the fast stuff, and then the dissonant sevenths. I think it's sort of like an affect of passion, and not like the passions of Christ, the Matthew and St. John,
like longing, right?
Yeah, like love, or
the seventh has been used in that frame of reference for a long time. Or I should say, continues to be used in the Romantic era a lot for this sort of sense of longing, because as an interval, it's perfect for that metaphor. It reaches and it goes pretty far, but it also like doesn't make it to the octave. So it implies that there is some distance between people or something like that that's not resolved.
Yeah, and sevenths, they don't generally resolve 2 octaves to 8. 7 usually goes to 6. One of the parts stays and the other goes down or up from the bottom.
You mean after the leap, right?
Or down
from
the bottom.
Yeah. It's important that we say after the leap, because if you were on the 7th scale degree, you very well could raise up to the octave. But yeah, you're right. When there's a leap of a 7th, usually the next thing that happens is a step down.
Or if it's a suspended 7th interval on a strong beat, then it has to go down as well, generally.
Yeah.
There are exceptions like the last note of the St. Matthew Passion and stuff like that are more retardations, which is a different thing.
Right.
But this idea of passion in dissonance, it does go back to like basically the father of passion in dissonance, which is Monteverdi. That's a perfect setup for the moments, the 2 small moments of Bach that I want to focus on at the end of the fugue. And they are these sequences, just little patterns that go on where the notes are just a little higher the next 2 beats, and then a little higher, and then higher and higher the next 2 beats, or even 1 beat. And the one at measure 128 here seems to go on as it climbs up, which is already a little less common than a sequence perhaps going down. But this one climbs up, and doesn't it seem to be a little too long? Like it's not supposed to be quite this long?
Yeah.
It reminds me so much of the Monteverdi madrigal, Si ch'io vorrei morire. In that madrigal, which is all just fueled by passion, there are these sequences that go on even longer than this. And quite frankly, like that's the whole point. It's ridiculous how far they go.
Yep.
And they go too far, and it's too pushy and almost egregious how much they go. And in fact, especially back in his time, it was not really allowed. And to use a sequence for any longer than what was obvious by hearing would have been a real faux pas. And there aren't very many in Renaissance music. But since in the madrigals, the most important thing was the expression of the text, Monteverdi just went for it. And it's wild. And some of them just go on, up and up. And some of them go on, down and down. And if you look at the text, it all makes sense. Sort of mature theme, though, of that text, if you want to follow that link.
Right, but it also speaks to how in the Baroque era, the passion themes and the longing themes, it was not considered improper to use those in a sacred context or a secular context. The same style of music could be used to express the love between lovers as it could between like the church and Christ.
I agree, but I do think maybe there was a difference in Bach's mind between those 2 types of passion in the way he used the music. There's obviously similarities, like harsh dissonances, but I think the active nature of this fugue is a little more on the love passion side, and the unifying motif as well, where the St. John and St. Matthew passions are tied more together by a sense of weight and dread. And the thing they have in common, though, is the dissonant intervals. Absolutely. So my favorite moment is the other time that the sequence kind of goes on and goes up. This one's faster and it's over quicker, but it sort of steps up to heaven in this delightful, blissful way. It's one of those weird quirks of counterpoint that It almost seems to my ears like parallel fifths between the bottom voice and the middle voice of this three-part texture, which are the background parts. The active part is on the top. The middle voice is syncopated and delayed and suspended in its tones, which makes it seem like there are consecutive fifths, and some of those are consecutive perfect fifths, and that is not allowed. But this is okay, and this is allowed because they're delayed. So it's all about timing. But the way it just goes up and up so fast, and the bottom is gone, and we're just elevated. It's so ecstatic, maybe is the word, transcendent, just for a brief moment. Just for the briefest little moment of Bach there. But I'd say the whole thing is filled with moments of Bach, and the ending is no exception. As we barrel toward an ending, I really do appreciate how, at measure 139, the cadence is coming to a close and we're about to get to our home chord, our tonic chord of E minor. We are about to, and we have this strong, strong dominant seventh coming into it. And then what does he do at measure 140? You just get one note on the bottom, and then a single linear toying with the tonic chord until all the notes finally settle at the end, which is a delightfully delayed reaction. It could have been... It would have been over too quickly in that case. He needed a coda, another couple of measures to really spin out that ending.
And now, here is that upward sequence moment from near the end of the fugue, from Toccata in E minor, from BWV 914. If this introduction to a moment of Bach has inspired you to look more into these harpsichord works or any of the wonderful works of this composer, you can find so many of those from the Netherlands Bach Society, which we will link in our episode description. We always use their recordings, and if you don't know this already, they are in the process of recording every single piece by Bach in their All of Bach project.
And next week?
Next week we'll stick with more instrumental music. We'll look at the Orchestral Suite No. 2 in B minor, BWV 1067, specifically the last movement, badinare, or is it badinare, or is it batinare?
Is it French? Badinare?
It is French, yeah, but is it badinare or is it batinare? And that is a question that we will answer next week.
Until next time, enjoy those moments.